Looks like we are live.
We did
I
it.
We actually did it.
We're there. It's happening. It's
Oh
happening.
my gosh, it happened. Sorry for that. Okay, let me put on the intro and what have you. But
We're
yeah,
already in it. We're
welcome.
already live. What do you mean the intro? This is the
Ah,
intro.
yeah, this is the.
There's no
Oh my gosh.
pretense of coming back and being like sophisticated and welcome. This isn't. No, we're past that.
Yeah, we're over it. All right, fair enough. Oh my gosh, but yeah, so sorry about that. I hope we're still in the comments. Steph J, I hope you're good. Thank you very much for bearing with us. Sorry, I had a bit of technical difficulties and all, but I just thought let me just click live, see what happens now. But yeah, looks like it worked. So we are here. So yeah, just a few shout outs before I even get going to Trinity Radio, Trinity Seminary. So that is with Braxton Hunter and Jonathan Pritchett. Love those guys to bits. And also the church split, Will Hess, my guy, and also Road to Emmaus Apologetics, which is Mr. Yeshua Speaks, and Rick Real, who is the Old Testament guy that we love so much. So just a quick shout out to those guys. Blessings and peace. And again, welcome to FT Transition. I'm your host, and I have a guest today, Doctor. I believe so, right? Yeah. Dr. J. Agnew.
Please, Dr. Agnew was my father. Call me James.
Like father, like son. Oh man, so it is my absolute pleasure. I know people might say that all the time, but it is my absolute pleasure to have this scholar with us today on a topic that I have just immersed myself into since my dissertation at Spurgeon's College. And he's taken it, like his work has taken my understanding to that next step that I thought, okay, I'm done, I'm good, I understand blood, da, 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 da. And then I read his work and I was like, oh my gosh. So anyway, without further ado, introduction. So, Mr. Agnew, um, what I'm gonna say here is just introduce yourself, your work, who you are, your credentials, your books, your social media, all that good stuff. Who are you?
Yeah, who am I? Okay, that's what I ask myself late at night when I'm staring at the ceiling in the bed. No, okay. Who am I? So my name is James Agnew. I go by also in philosopher's garb on some social media because, in this day and age, you gotta have a social media platform, right? Yeah, so I have a background in philosophy and theology. So I did a bachelor's in philosophy, then did a master's in theological studies, and then went on to do a doctorate in theology. Um, I have been interested in like theology and philosophy and biblical studies and stuff like that since I was, I guess, really probably in like high school. I think that's when it all started, and then it's been kind of almost like a love-hate relationship ever since. It's kind of almost been like almost like an abusive relationship. I just can't quite get out of it. I just keep getting drawn back in, and so yeah, I have mixed feelings about my obsession with this topic, but so I've written a couple books. So the ones that we're like talking about today is The Devil's Disbarment, which all my books are free on Amazon and Google Play. So like the Kindle ebook is free, or if for some reason Amazon doesn't work for your like region, you can find them on Google Play Books as well. So this is the one I think we're gonna be talking about today, which is The Devil's Disbarment, and it's about atonement. And then my dissertation that I did for my doctorate is What Jesus Didn't Know: A Defense of Canonic Christology. Um, that one's going to be a bit more, I guess, more philosophical theology side of things. And then I just recently, within the last like month or two or something like that, put out a new book called The Lord Appeared: Jesus as Yahweh in the Old Testament. This is my biggest book yet. So the other two books are around 140 pages. This one is 255. So went a little bit harder with that one, made it a little bit longer. And yeah, so I'm happy to be talking here with Mr. McDonald. Since we're going to be formal, yeah, absolutely, junior. Yeah, I'm happy to be talking. So let's see. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good
Excellent.
intro.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for that intro. And just for, as I showed this to James already, I have two of his books, The Devil's Disbarment. And what actually happened was, um, I remember buying it and then I couldn't remember it because we recently moved. So I couldn't remember if I actually bought it and put it in my library. So instead of checking my library, I went to my Amazon basket and saw it in the basket and I thought it won't harm anyone to just buy it again. So I clicked buy, and then I went downstairs and sorted out my library and found the book. I was like, okay, one could be for the library, one could be for on the road. Um, and that's why you see two bookmarks there. And I actually took this with me on holiday to read it, and was speaking to a brother on vacation about chapters. Yeah, I was supposed to be on vacation, and the missus got very upset because I was doing theology. Uh,
I guys like
yeah,
us don't often go on vacation mentally. We may be there physically, but yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, I was engaging with chapter 6, for about a few hours actually, which is a fantastic book. So yeah, if it's all over my social media as well, my Instagram and my TikTok. But yeah, in Philosopher's Garb, The Devil's Disbarment, it is such a great read on this topic of atonement. He goes into Leviticus, he goes into Isaiah 53, he goes into lots of difficult passages, and he does tackle a lot of difficult questions as well. So definitely a good read. And thanks very much as well, Mr. Agnew, for that introduction.
I feel like
So
I have to tell you real quick, so since
oh
you're
yeah,
talking about being on vacation,
yeah, go ahead.
when I was working on this book, there was like a section of like there was when I was like thinking this stuff through, there was some stuff that I was
Mhm.
hung up on, like trying to figure something out, and I was on uh I was on an anniversary trip with my wife. It was like the anniversary trip for
Ooh.
and I was like laying in bed in the like Airbnb or hotel or whatever we were in, and I was laying in bed and thinking about it and stuff like that. And then I had a thought pop into my mind. I'm like, could that be it? And then I thought of it for a little bit, and then I set up. Like we had already gone to bed. I was like, "That's it. I got it." Like I think we got it now. And so like I got up, so I like didn't forget it. Went to my computer and started writing. And then the next day, my wife and I were walking around like I think it's like the garden area or something like that, like the at the Biltmore, like their estate. And I was like talking atonement to her. And I was like, okay, but like if it's like this and it's like this, and so yeah, I can sympathize with that. I just felt like I had to
Yeah.
think about it. Like even on my, anniversary, like trip, it was there rent free in my head.
Mine says save it for the pulpit.
You
You can't
fool.
hack it. Well, some good stuff, man. That's funny. Okay, well, let's get into some of the
Yeah, let's
stuff
do it.
now. So thanks for that introduction. That was great. And again, just apologies for earlier on, everyone, for the technical difficulties. But since we're here, let's just get right into it. So, past atonement perspectives. So, again, tell us about your history, what you advocated for, all that
Yeah.
good stuff. Go ahead.
So up until I was doing my doctorate in theology, which I guess was like 2023-ish. Up to that time, I was a thoroughgoing, card-carrying penal substitution advocate. I had defended, and I wasn't. I had won my penal substitution, card carrying. I had won that in battle. I had done debates with Orthodox priests. I had argued with like family members, and by debates I mean like not like formal public ones, but like ongoing like arguments with a friend who's an Orthodox priest. I had, put up stuff on my TikTok and whatnot, defending penal substitution and using it as an explanatory framework for the atonement. I was confident that you could not, that was the key. That's the cornerstone of the atonement. That was my background. And little did I know that I was going to become one of its fiercest enemies. Yeah.
It's like Paul, right? Like
Yeah.
hardcore
Yeah.
Judaizer. It's just like actually, no, that's cool. So advocate for PSA. Um, I guess next thing I'll ask is what were some of your key arguments for PSA? Maybe just one or two if you can remember. Like,
Yeah, so I mean,
mm,
it has to be Isaiah 53,
mhm,
pierced for our transgression, he bore our sin, like
yeah,
that's a Hebrew idiom meaning X, Y, Z. I just regurgitated William Lane Craig. Um, I like that there was so much light in the background there for a second. Like I like it, it looked like there was like like the glory of the Lord was coming through on my screen or something. That's what it looked like. I was like, oh man. Yeah, so like Isaiah 53, Romans 3, he put him forth as a propitiation and all
mm,
that, and then sprinkle in some philosophical arguments for the Muslims I was interacting with, where it's like, oh well, if God didn't punish someone, that means he's not just. So like just the
right,
typical stuff that you hear PSA advocates use. I use that stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and so that's like your common sort of regurgitative arguments, and yeah, I understand what you mean. Um, So I guess last point on this then would be your perspectives and treatments on other views. So what I mean by that is, did you hold any other view other than PSA? And if not, or even if so, what was your treatment to those who had opposing views?
Hmm.
For yeah, go ahead.
I think I would have said that, like, if someone had been like Christus Victor, I would have been like, yeah, Christus Victor through penal substitution. That would be like, yeah,
Right.
that this is the way that it was done. So, um, I was fine saying that there's these other elements,
Mhm.
but I would say like the core mechanism was penal
Mm.
substitution. Yeah.
That's usually what I hear as well from those who are heavy with PSA. It's like, okay, well, PSA is like the main sort of crux, and the other, I'm going to say, quote, atonement theories sort of like orbit around PSA. But
Hmm.
yeah. So I understand that, and that's sort of what you would hear. So I guess the next question is, what changed? Was it studies, school, arguments never heard before? Like, what?
Yeah, it was
Go ahead.
accident. It was
You're
an
You're
accident.
Damascus Road, yeah.
Yeah, it was an accident, man. I um I was working on my dissertation. And so
Hmm.
I think several things kind of came together. So one, I am like a thoroughgoing student of my Heiser. Like you can't read at least two of my books you can't read without recognizing that this guy's probably been like Heiser,
Yeah, yeah.
influenced. So I had been influenced by Heiser for a while, and that was going on in the background. I think one of the major things is I was I was working on my dissertation, and my dissertation, even though it isn't really about atonement, um, it had to do with stuff regarding the incarnation, and I was spending some time in Hebrews about the statement of Jesus had to become like us in all respects so that he could be our merciful, faithful high priest. And I was like, okay, I need to dig into this. I need to work through, like, okay, because this is saying like a crucial aspect of Jesus's ability to be our high priest, and so on and so forth, is him being like us. I need to get into like what's going on with high priest, like what's going on, like what's the background of that. I remember saying to the priest who's a friend of mine, I was like, yeah, I need to, I think, get into like Hebrews and stuff like that. So I started looking into some stuff like that and spending and thinking a lot about what was going on in the logic of Hebrews because of my dissertation. And if you're looking into stuff regarding like priest and sacrifices, and like, okay, like Leviticus and stuff like that, it's all kind of related. Um, and so I think at that time I was doing some research and reading for stuff like that. I think maybe at that point I had like encountered some of Heiser's stuff about what's actually going on in Leviticus and like purification and sacred space. I think maybe at that time I was either had encountered it or was just encountering it or was about to encounter it. It was around that time like that I was starting to get familiar. Um, I think at that time there was starting to be, I don't remember what caused it. I think there were some things that were starting to cause me to have some doubts about PSA or like the way I articulated atonement. And it might have been partly because like the stuff I was saying, I maybe knew like, does that track with Hebrews? You know what I mean? Like how does that mesh? So there's just some questions started to get presented in my mind. And then I remember at one point I posted on Facebook something like, does anybody have like a model of the atonement that like actually incorporates the biblical data? And some guy was like, oh, I just did this interview with David Moffat. And here's his book. And so I looked at Moffat's book, and that Moffat didn't get me like all the way. It didn't answer all my questions, but it was like a really important milestone. So that was like one area that a lot was like going on, is like Moffat, Heiser, Leviticus, whatnot, things like that, taking Hebrew seriously. And then another thing, by accident, I was reading this book by oh, I forgot the gentleman's name. I'll pull it up in a second. John Peckham. There it is. I was reading this book by John Peckham about divine attributes, and he just kind of goes to the Bible and looks at the biblical data for various like attributes we want to ascribe to God, like knowledge and omnipotence, omniscience, stuff like that. Um, and I was looking at that for, I think, something regarding omnipotence or omniscience, and he had a section that was about like cosmic warfare. And I've read Heiser, and I'm like, ooh, tell me more. I started looking at it, and then what I realized is, Peckham is the one who got me into this idea of like, this kind of divine counsel like scenario, like because Heiser had got me like divine counsel stuff, but what Peckham gave me is this idea of like the rules of engagement, and this idea of like this ongoing like rules that God plays by, and stuff like that. Um, And there was some stuff that I think Peckham said in that work that got me thinking and got me interested, and like it started some wheels churning along the lines that I end up running with in my book. Um, and so then I picked up Peckham's other book, Theodicy of Love, which he really goes into. He comes at it from a theodicy perspective, like dealing with the problem of evil. He really lays out some of this idea of like God, defeating allegations and the heavens, and having these rules of engagement that he plays by when dealing with the corrupt Elohim and stuff like that. So all these things just started to kind of come together, and so then I got to this point where I was like, okay, I need to go into the literature and start looking at atonement theories and find something that works, because PSA isn't cutting it. So I started looking around, I started reading other stuff, and I couldn't find anywhere anything that satisfied me, because I would be like, okay, I didn't like PSA because it like I felt like was lacking in these other areas. But then I would go listen to like a Christus Victor proponent. I'm like, this is okay. We're tracking on some of the things that I think like PSA is lacking. But then I get all this other stuff you're just like not telling me anything about, and like I'm like I gotta deal with that too. Like what about Hebrews? Like Hebrews is like like a pebble in my shoe. And so I looked around for a little bit and I was like, okay, like nobody's doing like nobody's giving me what I want. I was like, okay, if you want something done, you got to do it yourself. So
Do it
I was
yourself,
like,
yeah.
yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll make my own atonement theory, and I'll like try to like incorporate this all together. And there were times I almost gave up. I almost felt like, okay, like there were some dots I wasn't going to be able to connect here. And I think I was my one of my faculty like mentors in my doctorate. He has a background, like he's done a lot of stuff with the Old Testament, and he was a good guy to like bounce ideas off of. And there was a point where like we would joke with each other, and he'd be like, yeah, I'm not sure you're gonna just like come out and figure it all out. I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna it's just gonna be great. The thing nobody's been able to figure out, I got this. And so yeah, so that's kind of what changed, is like just questions that kept nagging at me. I needed answers.
Mm, brilliant. It's like a series of events that kind of took place, and
Mhm.
that's great, because it's because what I like what you said, right? It's because I never imagined incorporating the divine council in the atonement.
Mhm.
Um, so it's like what you've done is connect that bridge, because when my studies after my dissertation, when I did like the three, it was like the three this wasn't the title, but it was basically like the three utilizations of blood in
Mhm.
scripture and the ancient Near East. And so I was like, okay, let me study this blood thing. And then it was like, okay, blood at the Passover. Okay, that was that. Blood at the covenants. Okay, that was that. And then blood in the atonement. And how these were three distinct themes, but blood was used. It was the same element, which was blood, but it was used in three distinct ways. So
Mhm.
then when I looked how blood was used in redemption, I was like, huh, but that's not dealing with sin. That's just victory over death in the Passover.
Mhm.
And then blood covenant, Exodus 24. Okay, well, that's not dealing with sin or redemption. That's like a union and that. And then when I did the atonement, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy, the death of the animal and whatsoever. And I was like, wait, what? There's impurity? Like, what's going on here? So
Mhm.
then I began to look into that. And I'm glad you mentioned David Moffat, because I recently engaged in his work, rethinking the atonement.
Mhm.
So there were scholars like David Moffat, Jacob Milgram. Oh my gosh, his
Oh
book,
yes. Mhm.
fantastic work, and some of Walton, some of Wright. And I think what Wright did, I read some of his work. I can't remember exactly what book, but he mentioned, he mentioned something like, with the Passover, how it had nothing to do with sins, but it was redemption. And then he mentioned in Leviticus how impurities had to be dealt with. And it put me into that framework. Like, what's this impurity stuff? Like, when you hear Leviticus and whatnot, you're just hearing atonement, you're hearing the death of the animal and the killing. But why is he talking about impurity? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Mary Douglas as well, um, is another one. So, and there was a lot of Facebook kind of interactions that a lot of people were, thank God as well, like what you said, were saying, well, this is not actually the atonement, and they were kind of getting my wheels going. And
Mhm.
like I said, I thought I done my dissertation, I'm done. And
Yep.
then yeah, and then I was like, yeah, I picked up these books, and then I can't remember where I first saw you.
Mhm.
Wasn't on Facebook. It was your interaction video. Was it David Allen?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That, yeah. So, and I when I drive sometimes like an hour and a half to work, and that video is, just for the audience sake, it's very long. It's like 3 hours, but an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back home is fine for me. So I played it in the car, and I was just like, when you broke down Hebrews, which we will get into, when you broke down Hebrews, that's when the light bulb actually finally clicked. However, in that video, it didn't put that piece, that final puzzle piece, which is what you do in your book.
Hmm.
How does this relate to the celestial, to the
Hmm.
divine council? Like, what is going on? Because we're just, when it comes to the atonement and anything celestial, it's God is angry. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
that's literally it. But you kind of connected that piece, which we'll get into. So your journey is fantastic, man.
You know what's funny about that
Appreciate that.
video?
Go ahead.
I
Yeah.
I I like wrote and recorded that video in Korea, and I was like, I was sharing, I think like an Airbnb or like a hotel room or something like that with my wife and my in-laws. And I was recording, I think I was recording that video, if I'm remembering correctly. I was recording that video and like they were in like the other room, and like I was like, I need to get this done, like this
Yeah.
just came out, like I don't. And then I think at one point like my in-laws asked my wife, like, is James angry? Is he like is he like is he mad at someone? Like, I was like, oh, she's like, and at this point, she's like heard me,
Yeah.
make these spirited videos and whatnot, and she's like, oh,
It,
maybe, yeah,
if you see the video, guys, you'll know why you say it
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Very passionate, yeah. It's a
yeah,
very passionate video, but it covered a lot of points. The connection with Hebrews and Leviticus, which we're gonna get into. We've got a whole section on that as well. So it's a fantastic video. Okay. So next point, which we're gonna get into now, is some biblical groundwork. So I have a ticker timer across the screen. What is the atonement? And I think you've mentioned already some of these scriptural references or allusions, but where can we find atonement in Old Testament? Like, and what is it?
yeah. Here's
Hmm.
what's part of the problem and part of the confusion is atonement's a word that like that pops up in translations, and it's used to translate several different words, sometimes Greek, sometimes Hebrew, and it can cause confusion. So let's maybe start with like what I think is the clearest cut, which is atonement is purification. So this is what you're going to see in something like Leviticus 16, I think it is, when it's talking about like the Day of Atonement, right? Like
Hmm.
that's a really easy just like test case to go to with a lot of these things is atonement. And in something like that, it's going to be this word kippur, this Hebrew word kippur,
Hmm.
that has to do with like the wiping away or cleaning or purification. It's the idea that the blood of the animal, when it's applied to the various places, it's going to, English's translation to say make atonement, but the idea here is it's going to cleanse, it's going to purify the sacred space. So that's probably the most obvious. Now there's a couple places where atonement pops up as well. So there are some instances where it's not in this type of like Levitical, cleaning impurities context. And so in those other instances, it's the same consonants, but it's kofar. And so Heiser talks about in one of his podcasts about there's a hominin problem, like just like in English, we can have words that are spelled the same, but they're different and they're even pronounced different or mean different things. A really good example is BOW. You can have a bow tie. You can have like a bow staff. You can be on the bow of a ship. You can bow out of
Right.
respect. Like there's all these different, things there. Um, and so you have some words, some instances of scripture. I don't remember the references off the top of my head. One's in Exodus, and I think one's at the beginning of Leviticus, where it says kofar, and it's translated to atonement. And so in those contexts, one of them is God's like, all the Israelites are going to have to pay X amount of money for and it has something to do with the temple. Like they're gonna have to pay this type of money, and that'll be paid as like a kofar, right? And so sometimes it'll render it as like, and this will make atonement for them, right? And then you have in I think it's Leviticus 1 when it's talking about burnt offerings, that the when you make the burnt offering, it'll make atonement for you. It's supposed to make a kofar. And so this is confusion because then there are people like, oh, like the burnt offering, like it's an atonement offering, but like not quite.
Mm.
So like what Heiser talks about is this word in this way. It's kind of this idea of I'm going to give you this thing either to to prevent you from being mad at me, or to, if you're mad at me, to like us try to like get back on the same page again. And like the example he gives is, and this is an example that I think works well for me,
Hmm.
is imagine like you're showing up at somebody's house. Well, you might bring a like a fruit basket. You might bring like a gift to be like, oh hey, like I'm coming to your place. Like it's a gift that you bring. Um,
Right.
and if you didn't do that, then it might cause anger. In fact, I will give you a I'll give you a very personal example of this, right? My in-laws are first generation immigrants from Korea, and the very first time I met them, I think I had been told by my wife. I think it had already been like, she was like helping like prep
Yeah.
me and whatnot.
Yeah.
And the first time I met them, I did not take a basket of persimmons. I did not take like a fruit basket, anything like that. And I was told later that they took offense at that. Like that was
Mm.
something they didn't like about me. And oh, okay, to be fair, they picked us up at LAX airport at like
Right.
midnight or wherever it is when I got
Yeah.
in. Don't know why I was going to get a fruit basket at that hour, but okay, like point taken. And so there's this idea here of like it's not necessarily the case that the person bringing the kofar, it's not necessarily the case that at that moment God's already like, I'm mad at you. It's like this
Hmm.
is something you do to prevent God being mad at
Mm.
you. So in the instance of the burnt offering, you're coming to God's house. It's kind of like you're bringing them like a fruit basket, like a welcome
Hmm.
gift, or like, okay, like you're showing respect here. And then with the aspect of the payment that the Israelites give, it's like you're paying this and you're contributing to, I think it's like the building of the temple or something like that.
Hmm.
Them participating in that function and supporting that is going to prevent, God getting mad at them. But it wasn't like God was actively mad at them and they were like buying God
Right.
off or something like that. So I think most of the time when we're talking about atonement in like a theological context, it's really this idea of like purification, but like there are those handful of exceptions and examples. And then
Hmm.
generally in theology, is this where I'll wrap it up and put a bow on it. And generally in theology, atonement is just used in this really broad sense of like at one ment with God, like how we're
Right.
reconciled to God. And
Hmm.
then so that just has even like more confusion about it. So like Ron Johnson, who is a scholar who has done some work with like Heiser and done stuff like on his podcast and stuff like that. Um, and he also was someone who influenced me. I read through some of his work. He, I think, has at times questioned like, is atonement even like the right word to be using with some of the stuff that's going on. So yeah, that's kind of atonement in a nutshell, in a really sloppy nutshell. Yeah.
I think no, that was brilliant. I think David Moffat in his introduction mentions that the Tyndalian kind of understanding, William Tyndale understanding of
Hmm.
atonement, he read, at one meant in the New Testament reconciliation in Paul.
Hmm.
So it was like
Hmm.
the gospel of reconciliation, which was the gospel of at one meant. But then when he turned his attention to the Hebrew scriptures, he kind of used that same verbiage in
Hmm.
Leviticus, which then caused this whole theological kind of like conundrum going forward.
Hmm.
So but no, that was a great analogy that you put forward there, and I hope you are now at one with your your
I think there have been some cleansing of the impurities that I introduced through my social blunders. That wasn't even the only social blunder that I made
yeah.
there, but that's the most one that's relevant to atonement. But yeah, yeah, I think we're doing better.
Sweet, sweet. Okay, so you mentioned purification and so on and so forth, which is great. So let's get into this. I don't know if you want to be specific on Yom Kippur or whatever comes to mind, but what is the purpose of atonement, given its meaning?
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
the purpose of atonement, or at least the purpose of Kippur, is I think it's to make sure that God can continue to dwell, or will continue to dwell, with the Israelites. And
Mhm.
in the ancient world, it's the idea of what nation has a God so near to them as the Lord our God is to us. And it's like, well, God puts conditions on that. If you guys are acting foolish, if you guys are like running around being like all types of tomfoolery, and you're like doing all these like sinful things or disgusting
Mm.
things, like I'm not going to dwell in like this filth. Like um you gotta act the right way around me. Like I'm good, but I'm not safe. Is almost the word I
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to use. Like bringing in Lewis, and so it's this idea of things that the Israelites did would defile the land or defile the temple, and there's this idea there. It's like, okay, there's been this defilement, and the point of the Levitical system is to clean and to purify Yahweh's dwelling amongst the
Hmm.
people, so that he would stay there with them. And the idea being that if they didn't do this, and if the sin or the impurities just abound, then Yahweh would be like, I'm gone, bye. Like, and then we see
Yeah.
that there are instances in the Bible where God's like, all right, I'm out. Like, you guys are running amok. I'm over it. Yeah.
It's sort of like a landlord, like, okay, you want to stay here and whatever, but keep the place clean. If
Yes,
you
that's a
if you
good.
don't,
Yeah.
either you get the boot. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it's sort of like this, as you mentioned, basically just keep the place clean. Right? This
Hmm.
literally what the offerings or the atonement was for. I got here community function, and the reason why I put this here is because John Walton actually mentions, and everything that you mentioned as well is what I read. Like, for love of me, I don't know if it's in like Evil and the Justice of God or something like that by N.T. Wright. I can't
Hmm.
remember what book, but he also married Douglas, and Walton mentioned that it was literally to keep the place clean so that Yahweh
Hmm.
can remain with his people. And what John Walton mentions, like a community function, is like the analogy he gives is like out like today, um, humanity's function or community function could be analogized like like our recycling system, how everyone
Hmm.
participates in recycling because it's better for the world, better for the community, but it's something that everybody does, right?
Hmm.
And he mentions this, it's like when Israel's defiled or somebody does, everybody participates in this, keeping Israel clean, keeping Israel holy, because it was a covenant between God and them.
Hmm.
um so this was literally what they had to do, and everybody participated in that. So he kind of says it's like a community kind of thing, just
Hmm.
to keep the place clean. So, nah, good stuff. That was just from Jay Walton. Um, Sweet. So, mention the purpose of atonement, which was great. So, let's go to this one. Like, what happens on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement?
Yeah, so on the Day of Atonement, you have the main thing is you've got two goats, right? You've got these two animals. I mean, technically you have more than two animals, but you have two goats. Um, and you have one goat that is set aside for Azazel. Who's that?
Hmm. Yeah,
And you
yeah.
have one goat, and you have one goat that's set aside for Yahweh. And the goat that's set aside for Yahweh, this is the one that it's taken into the sacred space. It's killed, and the blood is taken into the sacred space, and the blood is taken and sprinkled on the various furniture and places of the like the tabernacle or temple or whatever. And this is something I talk about in my book. Is this is the day where the blood of the animal is taken to the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, and it's sprinkled on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. And something I think is going on here is the Ark of the Covenant is described as being Yahweh's footstool. So like it is depicted in this idea of like you have the cherubim and like Yahweh is enthroned upon them, and the Ark is described as being his footstool. And we're told that Yahweh is in the Holy of Holies on this Day of Atonement. He appears there. So I think what's going on here is the blood of the goat that's for Yahweh. It is being taken and it is quite literally being like put at the feet of Yahweh. It's like being sprinkled at Yahweh's feet. And this is where I would talk about this idea in the ancient world of like, what is an offering? What is a sacrifice? An offering is a gift. It's a gift given to a deity king, like it's a tribute, like something like that. And then a sacrifice is like a specific type of offering. And so like this is what I think is maybe like one of the most clear cut like ways to think about this is like on the day of Yom Kippur, think like you have the animal, the life of the animal is in the blood. So we're taking the blood, the life of the animal, and you are laying it down at the feet of Yahweh, right? Like this seems to me like a really like clear cut like instance or way of conceptualizing this being a gift given to Yahweh, in addition to kind of all this like purification stuff. So I think there's stuff like that going on, and but then you have this goat for Azazel. And if you don't know, Azazel in like the ancient Jewish mind is like he's this like big cosmic bad guy. He is responsible for some of the tomfoolery that goes on in Genesis 6, with the sons of God coming down and mating with like the sons of men and or the daughters of men, and so he in that world he's a bad you might think like he's a bad demon type guy, something like along those lines. And so there's this idea, it's like, okay, we did Yahweh stuff. Now with Azazel, they essentially kind of confess all the sins and whatnot on this goat, and they kind of, there's this idea of we lay it all on him and then we send it out into the desert. And the idea being we send all this garbage, all this trash, like all these sin impurities, we send that out to where it belongs. We return to cinder, right? Like we return this to cinder, and we send it back out to the desert, which is where like demons are believed to, like, and evil spirits are, believed to dwell in the ancient world. So it's kind of like two things are going on the Day of Atonement. It's like we're getting rid of all this bad stuff, we're returning it to cinder. We're unsubscribing from that, and then we are making sure that we've renewed our subscription with Yahweh.
Oh, shots fired, man. My
I
stream,
thought I
man.
said about that.
Oh my gosh. So that's the problem that we had. I had to renew my stuff, which is funny. Shots fired.
Uh,
Oh gosh.
but that's
Okay.
kind of a good
Yeah,
analogy. I
that
mean,
was.
actually, I did it off the cuff, but like it's kind of a good analogy for what's going on.
No, that was actually pretty good. Fantastic. Shots fired, man. Uh, Before I go any further, while we're here, and we will
Mhm.
take questions at the end, hopefully, if the audience is still here. But we have, I guess this was when we was describing what is the atonement. Steph J, lovely sister, she says defilement, meaning uncleanness and sin, or is it one or the other with kapura?
I think it's both. So I think there's the idea. So there's some things that cause the need for kippur, which aren't like inherently sinful, um like a woman giving birth or like touching a dead body. You didn't sin there. Like somebody's got to bury the dead. Like if Yahweh's gonna tell you, you need to bury the dead, and Yahweh tells you like, don't touch the dead. Like if both of these are sins, like you are in a pickle. It seems like Yahweh's just like setting you up to fail, right? Like if you're an ancient Israelite, you'd be like, which one do you want, boss? Like it would be like really difficult to make these two things like work. So it's things like that. It's like, or there are things related to like bodily fluids and whatnot. So there are some things which I think are like just in impurities in this type of like sense. But then I think there are some other things like unintentional sins that would also be like require some type of like kippur. So I think it's a little column A, a little column B.
Sweet, sweet. Thanks for that. Thanks for the question, Steph, as well. So okay, very good. And I like what you mentioned. And the next I guess question will kind of go in more depth in what you've just kind of mentioned. And I'm glad you mentioned, and you're gonna do it again anyway, the lid of the ark, Hilasterion,
Hmm.
hashtag that. We're gonna get into that. Yeah. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So I guess the next question after what happens on the Day of Atonement, which you've just explained, but here's when we go into a little bit more depth. So where does the atonement take place, given the articulation that you've mentioned, all that good stuff? Where does it happen?
It happens in the sacred space, in the
Oh,
earthly tabernacle, right? Like it takes that. Oh, like yeah, don't spoil it. Don't spoil
oh
it before
yeah.
we get to Hebrews. Oh. Like he knows. It takes place at least in the Old Testament in this kind of like earthly like temple tabernacle. Yeah, that's where it happens. Is it goes in. That's where things are purified, whatnot. And but then like Moffat talks about like there's this idea that like what goes on in the sacred space like corresponds to the land, and it's like that's interesting. And I'll just make a little side note there and be like
Mhm.
read Moffat for more of that. But for the most part, yeah, I think atonement it takes place in Leviticus in the earthly tabernacle temple. Yeah.
Interesting. And we're gonna go. So atonement takes place. Okay, there, perfect. So next question, and the reason why we're kind of putting a pin in it is because we're gonna. Well, I say we, like I'm doing anything here.
We're
Doctor,
doing
I
it
think I do.
together. It's like it's a you're the yeah, you're kind of steering this. You're just pointing me in directions and saying talk about that. So it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
it's a yeah. You're
Oh
yeah.
gosh, I'm doing something. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, we're gonna get into this more thoroughly when we get to the NT, the New Testament. So here's just like the backdrop and the illusions. But when we go forward, it will make sense. It did for me. That 3 hour video that I've watched more than once, it makes sense. Oh gosh. So let's do this one then. So given you what you've mentioned with the atonement, with the blood, life is in the blood, offering, sacrificing, does the sacrifice experience wrath? Is that what's going on in this narrative or anything like that? Like explain.
Well, if you listen to penal substitution advocates, that's what's going on.
Right.
And no, absolutely not. There is no conception. There is nothing in Leviticus to express the idea that what's going on with these like sacrifices is that like wrath is like due to the person, and then God's like, all right, I'll take it out on the animal instead. And like think about just how absurd this is. Like imagine Yahweh's in heaven, and then like I don't know, he's talking to an angel and he's like, hey Gabe. And he's like, wait, what? She had a child? Oh no, that I will not stand for that. I am so angry about this. I've got to kill something. Like she gave birth, and I'm so mad. I've got to kill something. It's either going to be her or it's going to be one of her goats. Or it's going to be one of her oxen. Like is that what you think is going on with like Yahweh in the Old Testament? Like he's like, oh, they touched a dead body. Like, oh, I've got to deal with this somehow, and I'm just not going to be able to get over this until something dies. Like this is like a really
Right.
like ludicrous, I think like way of like thinking about what's going on with Yahweh. And like a lot of the stuff, and like here's the thing, there are sacrifices in the Old Testament that like they're not even like remotely connected to, like they're not even under the title of like sin offering. You have like
Mm.
the peace offering, the burnt offering, like these celebration type things. But if you think of offerings as like their gifts, then it's like, okay, this makes sense. Like sometimes you give a gift to like celebrate, sometimes you give a gift to say I'm sorry, sometimes you give a gift as a like, oh, I'm coming over to your house, here's a fruit basket, don't hate me. Like there's
Yeah.
different like reasons you might give a gift, and it's the same thing with sacrifices. And so this type of like penal substitution, like reduction of like sacrifice, is because God wants to kill the person, and he's like, I'll take an animal, like I'm merciful,
Right.
I'll take an animal instead. That not only does that like not make sense with stuff even under the sin offering category, it doesn't even make sense with things outside of
Mhm.
the sin like offering category. So yeah.
Okay, no, that's good. And I guess this sort of might I just for the audience sake as well, what James is mentioning is I think Jacob Milgram mentions this as well, because he went over this as well a few moments ago. Is that when you see atonement, Jacob Milgram actually mentions it should be like purification. So when it says or sin offerings, I think that's what it says. So when it says sin offerings,
Hmm.
Milgram mentions it's purification offerings because that's the idea that's being conveyed. So it is to do with purification. So I guess I don't know if I think you mentioned already like other sin offerings, or you mentioned like the dead and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. So it's um just to kind of briefly go over it, because we only like really focus or think about Yom Kippur, but as you mentioned already, when a woman gives birth, she's defiled, but there's no
Hmm.
like immoral act that in that sense. So
Hmm.
what would be the purpose of the offering, right?
Yeah, and I think I talk about this in I think chapter 6. I talk about the Levitical stuff in my book in two different chapters. One is chapter 3, where that's kind of my general like Levitical, what's going on with blood in the Old Testament and
Right.
how does that connect with
Hmm.
Jesus. And then I talk about it again in chapter 6 when I'm responding to penal substitutionary like arguments regarding Leviticus. Um, yeah, so you've got like there are sin offerings that don't have to do with anything like
Hmm.
immoral like actions. They were just like somebody gave birth, which I think Yahweh's fine with us like giving birth to things. I think that's part of what he wants like Adam and Eve to
Right.
be doing, but maybe I need to like recheck Genesis there. So like so you've got that, and then like like I already said, you've got several different types of offerings in Leviticus. And
Hmm.
what do you know? Animals die in those as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
unless
Yeah. Yeah.
Yahweh's just really mad all the time about everything, like
Yeah. That's some good stuff. All right, so we're gonna pivot now to NT, New Testament. So let's get into the atonement understanding the New Testament. So let's before we dive into the book of H, the honorary H, um, Peter, Paul, James, John. Do they mention anything in regards to what we have mentioned so far in regards to Christ, like purification, washing, cleansing? Do they mention anything like that? Can we find anything like that in their epistles? What say ye?
yeah, what's saying me? Okay, yeah. So Jesus' blood in Ephesians 2:13 is what allows us to draw near to God. The blood of Christ is like what ransomed us. That's First Peter 1:19, Revelations
Hmm.
5:9. So that's like not as much the purification stuff, but almost kind of maybe is similar to kafir. Um, maybe. I would maybe
Hmm.
think about that. But anyways, you've got the blood of Christ purifies us in First John 1:7. It justifies us in Romans 5:9. We're sprinkled with the blood in
Hmm.
First Peter 1:2. The blood of Christ makes our garments white in Revelations 7:14. It conquers Satan in Revelations 12:11,
Hmm.
and it reconciles all things in heaven and earth to Christ in Colossians 1:20. Those are the instances, without talking about the book of H, that have
Right.
to
Okay.
do with some of the instances that I talk about in my book about the work that the blood of Christ is doing. So there's this idea of
Hmm.
purification, um, freeing
Hmm.
us, letting us enter into Yahweh's presence, stuff like that.
Awesome. Awesome. And it's good to see that they allude to what's going on in the Old Testament as well, whether it's
Hmm.
because you mentioned freed us. So that's this imagery of Passover, right?
Hmm.
And then like washing us or cleansing us. First John, I believe, is something like, if any of us do sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ. No, not that one. Actually, it's First John, which is, these things I write unto you. No, if anyone sins,
Hmm.
we. What does it say? I used to
Let me
know
see.
this
I'll
off the
bring it
top of
up
my
because
head.
I referenced one there. First
First of
John
one,
1:7. Let's see. So First
and
John 1
mhm,
7. But if we walk in the light, as He
that's
is in the
it.
light, as we are in the light, as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, His Son, cleanses us from all sin. So there we get that idea of
Perfect.
blood being cleansing. Yeah.
Perfect. And that is a fantastic verse of John understanding the cleansing aspect of
Hmm.
Christ's blood, right?
Hmm.
So that's actually a great verse. So yeah, okay, sweet. So I guess now we can pivot to the you're gonna have a field day on this. Uh the book of Hebrews, and I kid you not, this is where your video, David Allen, you went in. If I could
I
you
sunk my teeth in.
literally went in, because I think he has a commentary on the book of Hebrews, and you just kind of just went in. And I've never heard the book of. I've got like two commentaries on Hebrews that I'm still kind of parsing out, and I've never heard of it explained this way before in relation to how you've mentioned it, um, with Leviticus. And again, similar to you, I had a conversation like 2022, I want to say, with an Orthodox priest, and they kind of mentioned what's going on,
Hmm.
um, if I can say, post mortem with Christ, right?
Hmm.
So, but anyway, so New Testament understanding of atonement, the book of Hebrews and Leviticus. What is going on? Have a field day. I'm gonna mute my mic. Go ahead. Go.
Yeah, so when you're making content on the internet, sometimes you try to make, you try to put stuff in titles and the first few seconds to hook people and get their attention. And and Hebrews is one of those areas where I get to say all types of things that are like I let them finish, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that where it's like hear them out. I know it sounds wild. I get to say things like Jesus wasn't offered as a sacrifice on the cross. He was offered in heaven afterwards. Or I get to say stuff like um, Jesus dying on the cross wasn't enough to save you. Like that's actually one of the. Oh, dude, people go wild when I say that on. I've been like TikTok lives and stuff, where they're just like, "Whoa, you're saying like it's like something in their brain
Yeah,
just like they see
that
red, I guess. Like
it blew my mind when you made that statement. Like the sacrifice offered was in heaven. I was like, wait, rewind. Like
yeah,
what?
yeah. Let's back it up. Let's walk it back. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let him finish. Hear him out. Right. Okay. So let's go back to Leviticus and talk about that for just a second. So and remember that in Leviticus, the high priest kills the animal. So here's what I'm, like this is like the one of the things I ask people like before sometimes I'm like, okay, in the Old Testament, I'm a high priest, and I need to offer a sacrifice. There was like something done, and whatever. I've got my goat, or my bull, or whatever it is, or whatever the animal is. I've got it, and I bring it, and I kill it, and blood, death, all that stuff. It's like, okay, did I just sacrifice an animal? And a lot of people want to be like, yeah, you did it. I'm like, no, I didn't. Like, I didn't offer. Like, I slaughtered it, but I didn't offer it as a sacrifice at that point, right? All I did was just make a mess. I killed an animal. It's not offered as a sacrifice until you do the blood manipulation, which is like I think how guys like Milgram would rephrase it. You take the blood into the space and you do what Yahweh told you to do with the blood there. So
Hmm.
the high priest takes the animal and he takes it into the sacred space and he does
Hmm.
something with it there. Okay, let's just connect
Right.
some dots, right? Jesus is our high priest and he's the perihametos, he's the sin offering, which means that where Jesus died, if he's our high priest, he would need to take his blood into the heavenly holy of holies, and he would need to apply his blood there, right? Like that's if we're gonna do, kind of this
Mm.
parallel here. And that is explicitly what Hebrews tells us is going on. I cannot emphasize how explicit this is in Hebrews. Like Hebrews is giving this like it's really up to like probably like chapters 1 through 10 is Hebrews talking about Christ being our high priest and this idea of, so you get language in Hebrews like, just as the earthly place needed to be
Mm.
purified by these rites, so the heavenly place, which is what the earthly place was copied off of, this
Mm-hmm.
heavenly place, it needed to be purified as well, but by better things than the blood of bulls and goats, like so on and so forth. Like
Right.
this is the idea. It's like, oh, okay, it needs to be purified. How's that going to happen? Well, Hebrews tells us, right? Like Hebrews tells us, it's like, oh, well, Christ, he went in once and for all, and by the sacrifice of himself put away sin. And so let me see.
Hmm.
There's a section here in the end of this where oh yeah, so I'll read this. So this is Hebrews 9:23. This is one of my
Hmm.
favorite verses. Like
Yep.
this is one of my favorite things to go to when I talk about this, because sometimes people try to be like, no, 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 it was the sacrifice was on earth, and this is one of my verses where I'm like, take my hand and I'll
Yeah.
walk you through it, right? So this is Hebrews 9:23. Thus it was necessary. So at this point in Hebrews 9, he'd been talking about like these Old Testament Levitical stuff that we've been talking about. So this is
Hmm.
Hebrews 9:23. Thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered. Okay, where is Christ entered? Let's check
Right.
mark this. Christ has entered not into the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself. Okay, so he's entered into heaven itself, the place that things were copied off of, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. So he entered into the holy place to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Why did he do this? Well,
Right.
verse 25, nor was it to offer himself repeatedly as the high priest enters the holy places every year with blood not his own, for then he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. So that's not why he did it, right?
Hmm.
Then continuing, but as it is, he has appeared once for all. Wait a second, where did he appear? We
Hmm.
were just told he entered into the heavens to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. So when we see he has
Right.
appeared once for all, we know it's him appearing in the heavens at the end of the ages to put away sin. How? By the sacrifice of himself. So it's the
Right.
idea of he's our high priest. He's entered into the heavens. He's taking the sacrifice himself. He doesn't have to do this multiple times because, like he's not like these other high priests and he's got, better blood and so on and so forth. And that's
Right.
how things get done. And then, yeah, so that's that section. And then that is what kind of, it's because of that he can serve as our high priest. And then one of my other kind of favorite go-to verses in Hebrews is going to be Hebrews 7:25. So throughout Hebrews, there's this idea of like, oh, like we can be saved because Jesus is our high priest, and isn't that really great? We can like draw close to the throne of God. This is one of my other like gotcha texts. Or so I was just like, this is Hebrews 7:25. Consequently, he is able, it's talking about
Hmm.
Jesus, he's able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him. Since he, okay, let's pause here.
Right.
So what have you been taught all your life? You were able to be saved to the uttermost, right? Anyone
Hmm.
who draws to God is able to be saved to the uttermost since Jesus did what, right? Since Jesus died on the cross, since Jesus took the penalty for your sins, since all these things that
Yeah.
have to do with Jesus dying or God having wrath. Here's what the book of Hebrews says. He is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since
Mm.
he always lives to make intercession for
Right.
them. You're able to be saved
Mm.
to the uttermost because Christ always lives and is present with the Father and is there to intercede for you.
Wow.
This just breaks penal substitution, which tells you the main problem God had that needed to be fixed. Like the main problem you and God, like the main beef
Hmm.
between you two, is that God had all this rage and like wrath against you, and he just needed to let it out. And then after the cross, God was like, whew, got that out of my system. Now we're now able to move on. This completely breaks this because this is saying
Mm.
your salvation, it hinges on this ongoing activity that Jesus is doing in the heavens. And this is why I think Moffat has a section in his book where he says it is not finished. Like because
Oh, right.
Moffat gets being, like provocative too. So he has a section where it's like it is not finished. Yeah. So thanks for coming to my TED talk on Hebrews and Leviticus. Yeah.
I think one of my passages in Hebrews that I like is Hebrews 5, um where I want to read from like verse 7 from the ESV. But there's like a main point here. It's so Hebrews 5 verse 7 again, it talks about the priesthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in verse 7 it says, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayer supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. And I know you actually mentioned this in correlation to Isaiah 53 as well,
Mm-hmm.
which was actually a great link that I didn't see. When you said, coming to the end of Hebrews 5, where he says, by his knowledge
Mm-hmm.
shall he, justify, and so on and so forth. So that was a great correlation. And then, so here, then verse 8 says, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And then verse 9, and being made perfect. So this is obviously talking like resurrection language and
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth. Being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation,
Mm-hmm.
to all who obey him, being designated by God as a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So it's like he became the source of eternal salvation to those who trust him because of the priesthood. So this is like resurrection ascension language, and because of Christ's ongoing work as high priest, again, where the blood was applied and so on and so forth. It has all that connection and then further on in the homily, as you mentioned in chapter 9, he further stresses where the blood was applied.
Mm-hmm.
So like in the earliest chapters of Hebrews, it sort of just alludes to it. So, like in chapter 1, where it says, after he made purification for sin, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. I always thought that was the cross,
Mm-hmm.
because the cross was where, it was done. You know what I mean? It is finished. You know what I mean? But then,
On the cross where Jesus died, the wrath of God was
yeah,
satisfied, right? Like that's the
yeah,
hymn that I've been
that's the
told. Yeah.
song. But when I read Hebrews 1 in light of Leviticus, where the high priest made if I say the word made atonement,
Mm-hmm.
was, as you've mentioned, in the presence of God, where the blood was applied and then walked out to
Mm-hmm.
prepare for next year or whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
In Hebrews, it says, where after he made purification for sins, okay, if that's in the presence of God, just like the imagery of the Leviticus, he then sat down because
Mm-hmm.
his blood was enough. So it's he
Mm-hmm.
took his seat as high. You know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm.
but further along in the homily, it fleshes out what happened, where he offered himself and with his own blood and purification. And then even later on in Hebrews 9, as you mentioned, it says, how much more shall the blood of Christ through the eternal Spirit
Mm-hmm.
purge our conscience from this? So again, this
Mm-hmm.
purifying aspect of the blood is what Hebrews is talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
The blood is able to purify and to purge,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. So, and that was fantastic. You did go on longer in the other video, so but no, it was a great breakdown here. So, um, so then, is it safe to say, or would this be a valid question? So, the atonement took place post mortem? Then
Mm-hmm.
I guess that would be a fair assessment
Mm-hmm.
in Leviticus and also the New Testament crucifixion,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, if the atonement is this, I guess the scholarly term would be blood manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
which we could say is like blood application,
Mm-hmm.
what you do with the blood. So the atonement actually took place post mortem, so
Mm-hmm.
after death, rather than the atonement. So saying like the atonement didn't take place when the animal died on the altar, neither did the atonement take place on the cross, but
Mm-hmm.
it took place after death when
Mm-hmm.
blood was then brought in to where God is. It's like, hey, I'm gonna use this now and kind
Mm-hmm.
of clean the
Yeah.
place up. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
God, Jesus walks into the heavenly places and it's like, this place is filthy. I gotta,
Right.
I gotta. I'm being a little lackadaisical here. I'm being a little fun, for the imagery.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I actually, no, I like, so something that it's interesting. So a while back, I remember listening to C.S. Lewis talk about like when he was writing Narnia books, like he would just have these images like kind of bubble up in his mind, and like they
Hmm.
were a part of his thing. A while back, I don't remember. I think so around the time I was working on Atonement stuff, but I think earlier. I was moved by this idea. Like I'd be in church worshiping and doing stuff like that, and I was moved by this idea of Jesus entering into the heavenly places after his death
Hmm.
and sprinkling it with his blood. This idea, this triumphal like entry by Jesus in the heavens. That was an idea that was like bubbling up in my mind. It was.
Wow.
I was joking a while ago, but like it wasn't just like I said, oh, like I'm here now. Like it was like this triumphant, powerful like entry, like into the heavens, and Jesus applying his blood there, and disbarring the devil and stuff like that. And that's something that it kept on, like this idea of like this entry, that entry into the heaven,
Mm,
enters into the heavens with blood not his own, sprinkling it. That was something that like it came to my mind a lot. And I don't know if that's something that like maybe that's part of what instigated my atonement stuff, or maybe that just was like going along with it.
mhm,
But it's interesting how like that image
mm,
of that entry of him, entering into the heavens on our behalf. It's interesting how
mm.
that was something that it's like my mind when worshiping, it just kept on floating up.
So with that, so if we can just take like a little break from
Hmm.
the itinerary that we have. So with that then, and I guess with your, let's say, divine council model of the atonement of Christ or the purification,
Hmm.
with the imagery that you just mentioned, wouldn't Revelation 12 fit nicely in there,
Oh yeah,
where
yeah.
with the man child goes up, like the woman gives birth,
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
right? The man child ascends. I think it says to God and His throne.
Hmm.
Apocalyptic, like heavily apocalyptic, war breaks out,
Hmm.
and then the devil, that dragon, or whatever John describes, the serpent of old, whatsoever, gets cast down, and then you have the saints like rejoicing, right?
Hmm.
What is it that they say? Sorry, this was literally
Yeah.
off the cuff.
No, this is good. So this is Revelations 12, and if you're wondering, this verse contributes a lot to the title of my book. I think this is maybe so what's going on in my head here. Um,
Hmm.
so this is Revelations 12, starting at verse 7. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. So there's
Wow.
this idea here of, he was constantly there accusing us,
Hmm.
and he's been cast out, he's been defeated. How was he cast out? How was he defeated? Through the blood. And this is where I think a lot of people, because of like the things they're taught growing up, they think, oh, he's defeated by the blood, just the fact that the blood was shed. But now
Mm.
notice here, in
Wow.
Revelations 12, we're told that Satan, who was in heaven, is no longer in heaven because of the blood. In Hebrews, we're told that Jesus' blood, which was taken into heaven, purifies heaven.
Mm.
There seem to be some connections here, right? Like there seem to
Right.
be some
Yeah.
conceptual overlaps of Jesus' blood purifies the heavens in Hebrews, and through that we're able to be saved, and we have Jesus as our advocate, this guy interceding for us, this great high priest interceding for us, and that idea of the blood removes the devil from heaven,
Mm.
and he was there accusing us. So there seems to be this idea of we had an accuser, now
Right.
we have an advocate, right? And so this is like, yeah.
And Hebrews bands that together as well, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
I mean, even I guess depending how one would understand Romans 8, but who can condemn us, right? It says Christ that died, moreover, who was risen again, who was at the right hand, making intercession. So there's this,
Uh, yeah, in Romans, so what you're thinking of?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's one of my good. Yeah, so it's Romans. I think it's 8:38. Yeah,
right,
yeah. Who can condemn us? Christ is the one who died. More than that, the one who rose, who is in heaven interceding for us. Something along those
right,
lines. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So it's again this whole like heavenly sort of like paradigm of those who are now in Christ are okay
Mm-hmm.
because of what Christ did for them when he entered into the most, the most heaven,
Mm-hmm.
the heavenly place, which again, as you've mentioned, because as we broke this down before, is a similitude of what took place in Leviticus, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
didn't have all this kind of, celestial stuff going on in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. But when you bring it over to the New Testament and you see that the full picture, so to speak, you see why Christ entered into the most holy place to
Mm-hmm.
purify not only the heavenly space, but also us, right? So you see
Mm-hmm.
why that took place, and that was a good breakdown of Revelation 12 as well. So sweet. We have a few more here, and I'm aware of time. Um, so let's go to. I'm just trying to say. All right, so let's talk about the crucifixion, and because there's a lot of things that and again, just being mindful of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we kind of mentioned this already. So what happened on the cross? Like, what? Because we're not saying the cross is irrelevant. We're not saying that the cross wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessary. We're not, we're not saying any of that. Just
Mm-hmm.
FYI, right, to the user. So what did take place on the cross? Like, what happened?
Yeah, so sometimes people ask me though, like, well, then what was the cross for? You know, like
Right.
what is the cross in your view? And this is something I've done some interviews with Adam on the channel Curious Christianity. If anybody wants to see more interviews and talks and stuff like that, and me discussing kind of typical penal substitutionary proof text, but this is something that he and I have talked a good bit about. Um, so here's kind of my quick, easy answer, and I get into more stuff in the book. It's like, well, in order for you to have a sacrifice, the animal has to die, right? Like the
Okay.
the the thing being offered has to die. That's kind of a core part of the process. And so if I'm on an elevator and you give me an elevator, I'm like, okay, well, like if Jesus is going to be the sacrificial victim, Jesus needs to die. But then something I think more so is going along with with Jesus' death on the cross is I think this is the point where the spiritual forces of darkness
Hmm.
are at work and they are crucifying the Lord of glory, right? So this is a
Right.
phrase that Paul uses. If the rulers of this world, I think there he's referring to spiritual rulers. If
Hmm.
they had known what they were doing, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So
Hmm.
this is a point in which the evil powers they were laying claim to Jesus. I think the way I phrase it in my work is they were overstepping. There's actually several different ways that I've conceptualized this. One
Hmm.
way you could think about this is they're overstepping their bounds and they are laying claim to a they are laying claim to a soul that they didn't have they didn't have rights over. So they were claiming one for their own who they shouldn't have. Jesus says when Satan is coming for him, he says something like, "The ruler of this world is coming for me, but he has no claim on me." And so there's this idea here. It seems like
Mm.
connecting with the other stuff that goes on with that we see said about Satan is that Satan uses our sin to like accuse us before God and like lay claim on us, but Jesus is like, he ain't got nothing on me. It's like
Right.
so this is an instance in which Satan is he's overstepping. And so there's this idea like Heiser talks about of this section of one of the Psalms, like the bulls of Bashan surround me. Like
Hmm.
there's this idea of like he's surrounded by these, spiritual forces. And so that's one way I've articulated
Hmm.
this, and I try to articulate in the book. This is kind of almost like Jesus getting the spiritual forces to like take a queen sacrifice in a game of chess where it leads to a checkmate or something like that. But
Right.
then and that type of concept is very similar to stuff you see in like ransom theories in the early
Hmm.
church. But then there's another idea that I think you can have here, which this is a point in which Jesus is being perfectly obedient to the Father,
Hmm.
perfectly obedient to the point of death, a sinless person being perfectly obedient to the Father to the point of death. And this is something that is different in contrast, and I think maybe in a sense counteracts the disobedience of Adam. And this is an idea I've played with. So in Job, so I use Job to like really articulate some points in my theory. Job is tested by
Hmm.
God, right? And through this testing of Job and his loyalty, like um, are things in the divine council, allegations in the divine council are refuted. They are shown to be false, and it's through that process of Job's loyalty to Yahweh. Well, I think you could maybe say something similar is going on with Jesus, where this is potentially you could say like, okay, this is an instance in which Satan is and the cosmic powers they're testing Jesus. They're trying to get him to maybe break the rules of engagement and
Okay,
use
I
his
see.
fancy God powers. Like they're trying to get him to do something to make him disqualified. He's like this is like a fun little idea to play with here. They're putting Jesus to the test. Like, is he really gonna fall through? Is he really gonna be obedient to Yahweh here? And then Jesus, like he is, and there's all different kind of streams of thought that you could get into here. So you have that idea of they're overstepping. You have this idea of this is where they're testing Jesus, and Jesus wins. There's this idea in Job that I actually found this after I wrote my book and I was talking with Adam. There's this idea in Job of a
Mm.
righteous man, like the intercession of a righteous man, like he can intercede for others, and like others
Okay.
in a sense kind of like get maybe salvation or like justice, or they can be interceded for by the righteousness of Job. And so that's an idea that also is in like Jewish culture, is this idea of like, well, the righteous can intercede for the
Yeah.
unrighteous, and that means something. And so with Jesus, you have this righteous man, he's perfectly righteous, and then after this, what does he do? Like he goes and he intercedes for us, and isn't that interesting? So there's different like streams. I narrow in on, I think, the first two streams in my book, of this idea like the cosmic powers are overstepping, and this idea of maybe like this is Jesus, he's being perfectly obedient and offering himself to the Father, and this is the exact opposite of what Adam does, because Adam gives his
Hmm.
loyalty to Satan, but Jesus gives his loyalty to Yahweh. And so whatever accusation like Adam's stuff led to in the divine council, was like, okay, well, seems like Jesus, if one
Right.
guy, with Adam, if that's enough to get this ball rolling in the divine council and get us captive, it seems like one guy in the opposite direction, it seems like that's about equal. It can get things going in the other direction. And so that's kind of how I gesture at it towards my book. But yeah, there's really interesting lines of thought there.
That is, no, that is pretty dope. That is pretty dope. And that's, I love your the way how your brain kind of goes everywhere to get these analogies as well. So that is pretty good. I want to do one more point before we go into like conclusion. I mean, hopefully we can do like a part two where we go into
Hmm.
more of the crucifix and what took place on the cross. So hopefully we
Hmm.
can do like a part two to that if you're open to
Yeah.
that, which will be
Hmm.
great. Yeah. So I guess we can tackle and you can I guess summarize because you've mentioned this one, right? So
Hmm.
there's, for example, Hebrews 2, Colossians 2 goes into this, Revelation 12, as you mentioned already. So what's going on in those passages?
Yeah, so
Um,
you've got stuff like Hebrews 2:14 through 15, which says it says through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. You have Colossians 2:13 through 15. Jesus disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. You got 1 John 3:8. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. You've got Luke 4:18. This is Jesus talking. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty
mm,
those who are oppressed. Um, so on and so forth. You have this idea that Paul gives us this idea of, Christ, we were transferred from the kingdom of
mm,
darkness to the kingdom of Christ. This idea that the Father raised Jesus from the dead and seated him at the right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rulers and authorities and powers, dominion, and stuff like that. So there's this idea of what Jesus secured for us is we were subject, we were in this, we were kept in the captivity of the dark principles of the world and stuff like that. And then what Jesus does for us is like N.T. Wright has this little fun phrase: the gospel is the story of how Christ became king, or how God became king, or something like
yeah,
that. And
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's it. This is God dethroning and
Hmm.
taking things back and saying, okay, that time's over, playtime's over. Now it's Yahweh time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And this idea is really interesting. So there's like so I think I read about this a little bit. Maybe I read about it in my Atonement book. I think I touched on it. I looked into it when writing my new book on the divinity of Christ, where you have this idea in the Dead Sea Scrolls of like, you have the Prince of Darkness and you have the Prince
Hmm.
of Light, and there's like these two kingdoms, and like the Prince of Darkness, he's like trying to draw people away into like the kingdom of darkness, and and away from the kingdom. There's this idea of like these two, like the way of darkness, the way of light, and there's like, oh, the
Hmm.
Prince of Light and stuff like that. So it's interesting, and that idea actually I think kind of gets picked up in some of like John's stuff, but that's a whole other
Right.
thing. But yeah, there's this idea of like that's what the gospel is. It's the
Mm.
declaration that there's a new king in town,
Yeah.
and it's actually the original king.
Right.
It's like the OG, and like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the Gospel of Mark begins, right? And you
Hmm.
have Jesus saying, repent and believe in this gospel, and it's talking about the
Hmm.
kingdom. So you can't have a kingdom without the arrival of a king, right? So,
Hmm.
which is pretty good. So that's awesome. So I guess if I was to steal the title of N.T. Wright's book, like the next, I guess, video could be, what did the cross accomplish, in that sense.
Hmm.
But no, that's a very good breakdown. So we'll get into, I guess, conclusions and final thoughts. So we're saving some of the juicy stuff. I wanted to get into it just because of time's sake, but hopefully
I
we will
have
do.
time if you want to get into something else. I've got time. It's up to you. Yeah.
I get yeah, it's the capital WIFE, has arrived. So it's yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I
that time of
I
day.
too am a man set under authority.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
No, I too am a man, man.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's funny.
So what we'll do, so we'll get into we'll get into that. This has been fun.
I'm really proud
Um,
of that reference. I think that was a really
yeah.
clever joke. I don't care if the audience didn't like it. I thought that was really fun. Sometimes you crack a joke and you're like, man, I'm not always at the top of my game when it comes to like references and whatnot, but I really thought I killed it on that one. So
That
I'm
was
just gonna
that.
pat myself on the back for a little bit.
I'll have to rewatch that one. That was a really good one as well. That was funny, man. All right. So look, final thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So why is this understanding of the atonement, purification? Why is it important? What should we take away from this? What we're not saying, and I guess one of my favorite points I would say is how does this improve or affect our evangelism in
Hmm.
that sense? So what's our final thoughts on what we've gone through so far?
Yeah. So I think that in general, like as Christians, like we're all here because we want to know more about God. Like when you I think most of us who are really serious about the faith, like we read our Bibles and we're trying to learn more.
Hmm.
And I think that the more accurately we see God, I think the more we come to love him and appreciate him. And I think I have in my own life, I think I've been more moved and in awe of God and like it's helped me in worship and things like that. Like this understanding, like this, oh, like this is what's going on. So I think this is something that it helps us see God better, which I think this the more you see God, the more you're gonna love him and want to know him. Um, just an aspect and like in virtue of who he is, like whether or not it's atonement or whatever, I think God is the type of being that the more clearly you see him, the more you're going to desire him, right? And want to know him, at least if your heart is in that
Hmm.
disposition, you're like us as Christians. So this is something that I think is going to help on our walks and it's going to help in things like that. um, I think it's going to make sense of the biblical data. And so like as
Hmm.
Christians, like ideally we want to have a theology that makes sense of the biblical data. Seems like the type of
Right.
thing that we should be into.
Hmm.
And then yeah, so like one of the things that comes up a lot if you look at objections from like atheists or Muslims or Jews or whatever,
Hmm.
like penal substitution doesn't make sense to a lot of people. A lot of people are so like Muslims will be like, why doesn't Yahweh just forgive me? Like
Hmm.
Allah can do that. Like Allah can he can be like you sinned and I'll forgive you. I think that's probably the objection of some Jewish authors or like Jewish objectors who are like, what are we talking about? Like I can look in the Old Testament, I can see these instances where Yahweh like he can just forgive.
Hmm.
Um, so this is like this idea of God has to punish an innocent person before he can forgive me. Like there's a whole lot of objections and discontent and misunderstandings with Christianity that come from this. And so if you have an alternative model, this makes in a lot of ways, this makes evangelism and apologetics easier because if someone is like, if they start going down that route, you can just be like, well, I don't believe that. And what's interesting is so like recently, um, yeah, so actually here's an example. So recently, um, what's his name? Paul of Blogging Theology, who's a Muslim like apologist, Muslim Dawa
Hmm.
guy. I guess I don't know. He's a Muslim apologist. I don't know if he would be fine with calling himself like a Dawa bro or something. But um, he and he did a debate slash discussion with Mike Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, along with Than. So Than and Mike
Right.
had a discussion with him, and one of the things he brings up in that is the idea like, oh well, your God takes human sacrifices. Like there's
I
this
think I
whole
saw
idea.
a clip of that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I made a video responding to it, being like,
Mm.
"Hey, fellas, here's how we should respond to this,"
Right.
you know. Um, and so it's like there's just all these type of like misconceptions that go on in these type of minds of people of like objecting to Christianity because of this understanding. And if you can just break that and be like, no, that's not what we believe. That's not what the Bible teaches. Then that's just is like removing a stumbling block. And I think it can help. It can help draw people
Mm.
to God. Yeah.
I think in addition to that, Mary Douglas, which I guess is going to be our final point here. Mary Douglas in her book, I think it's called Danger and Purity. She mentions as well, just on a when it comes to like evangelism, just on a cultural level.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, presenting the gospel to somebody in the East,
Mm-hmm.
and if you present it to them in a manner of danger and purity, sacred space, defilement, they would understand this, or resonate with this more, because in the East, they have these understanding of what's taboo, holy things, and sacred space. I mean, even Muslims, right? They I remember when I was working in the care field, and NHS and so on and so forth, and he was adamant that he had either a nurse or a HCA bathe him like 3 times, like
Mm-hmm.
on point, right? So
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to say is that they have this conception of defilement, whether it's divers, if I can use KJV, divers, washings and cleansing,
Mm-hmm.
or things that they eat. So bringing this understanding, which is really ancient Near Eastern and Jewish, and in that culture, of purity, purification and cleansing, and bringing the notion of a loving God in a manner that loved us so much, took care of that problem. And she just simply mentions, imagine bringing the gospel in this way to a
Mm-hmm.
culture that understands purity, danger, sacred space. It would have more impact on evangelism in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, because you're evangelizing from a point in which they can understand already, and it will kind of just
Mm-hmm.
break down that wall in that sense. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's a good point. Yeah, so like being able to have those touchstones with a culture where like if you're phrasing it in this way, like they're already tracking about this is a problem. I think that's good. I just posted a short. I posted something from one of my alternative TikToks that I made a while back. It was like a poetic presentation of the gospel according to like my my
Hmm.
my model. Um, and I think that something like that, I put it in the thing if people want to check it out. That's like, I think that type of presentation of the gospel
Hmm.
is, I think it's more powerful. I think it's more spiritually moving. And something we haven't talked about in this
Hmm.
interview is like, I think this is all linked to like the deification of us as believers. So like
Hmm.
the one of the things I talk about this at like the tail end of my book is it's not just what like God is saving you from, which is like punishment and wrath and stuff like that. It's what he's saving you to, which
Right.
is entrance into his kingdom, entrance into his divine counsel, being able to approach the throne of God. There's this statement in Zechariah where I think it's the angel of the Lord says to Zechariah, and it's like a divine council scene. He says, "I will give you right of access among those, I will give you right of access among my courts, or and stuff like that." It's this idea of he will be welcomed in, and he will have the right to be, in that space, and that's something that I think is much more powerful. I have a friend who I was talking once, and I was explaining my work to him back when I was working on it, or when it had just come out, or something like that. And I was explaining my view of like atonement, and in contrast to penal substitution, and this idea of like
Hmm.
you are the sons of God, of which like creation is like groaning to see unveiled, and what that means, and things along those lines. And that is, I think, a much
Hmm.
more spiritually moving and powerful understanding of what the problem was, what the fix is, and what your
Hmm.
destiny as a believer is. Um, your destiny as a believer isn't just it isn't just to not go to hell. Like that is that you like
Right.
your destiny as a believer is to steal from C.S. Lewis, is you will one day be something that if we were to see you now, we would be tempted to worship you as a god. Like
Wow.
that's the
Wow.
way he
Wow.
he phrases it. Is we will be like the stars in the night sky, or as he tells Abraham. And so I
Hmm.
think when you bring all that stuff into all this, I think it makes it, yeah, I
Wow.
think it makes it way more powerful.
Great stuff, man. Great stuff. I guess here, because we're gonna finish here.
Hmm.
Um, this is Auntie Mir. My brother was somewhere in the chat as well. I got to scroll up. He just put a laughing emoji. I think it was when I said my WIFE is home. So I think that's kind of really he laughed. But yes. So going back to the introduction, when you set forth your work,
Hmm.
link to your books. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have the maybe Junior can put the link in afterwards, or maybe I can put a link in.
Mhm.
Actually, let me grab that link real quick and I'll throw it in the chat.
Yeah.
Because I think it's right here. Let me make sure that link works.
There he is.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to put a link to the book on the Atonement right here. So that's a link to this, The Devil's Disbarment, which is what we've been talking about. This is free. The ebook is free. So that's a link to that. And while you're at my Amazon author page, oh, what do you know? I also just released a entire book on the divinity of Christ. It's also free. You can check that out. I have to shamelessly, plug my new work as well. But yeah, so the both of those are in the link in the chat. If someone's watching this afterwards, at this point, if you Google the name of the title, like The Devil's Disbarment, and you say The Devil's Disbarment, James Agnew, I think it just pops right up on Amazon. And so the ebook of that should still be free. And it's also, like I said, on Google Play if for some reason you can't get it in your region through Amazon. I have 3 books. They're all free on Amazon. So, yeah.
I'm trying to see. Did you post it in the live chat?
I think so. Yeah, I think I posted it. I'm under In Philosopher's Garb.
Can anybody see it?
Am I crazy?
If everyone else can see it, then that's
Can
fine.
everybody else? Are they saying that they see it? I think.
V, is that a thumbs up? You can see it? Please say yes.
So, surely. If you're not a mod, it's not showing because I'm not a mod. Tell you what, I'll put the link here then for you.
Can you? Yeah, put it. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's the link to the that's the link to the thing. And then, if anybody cares, this is the link that I tried to post earlier to the kind of poetic presentation of atonement and the gospel, as I put out a while ago on one of my other channels.
So that's one, and then.
Yeah, there it is. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Me neither.
The more you know.
Sweet. I guess I will shoot this one cue from our dear beloved Reformed brother Christos. So yeah, it was visible now. Okay. I guess this is a question that Chris had.
I don't think I've interacted much with Bavinck and his Reformed dogmatics on Hebrews. Yeah, when I did my work, I looked into. I floated around between several Hebrew commentaries. I floated around. I looked at different stuff. His name doesn't ring a bell with me. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, no problem at all. And that one I ordered the other day because of Steph. Okay, yeah. So your book's coming out again. I think it's this one that he meant. I can't even see it in my light. The Devil's Disbarment, which is a fantastic book. So, and I love chapter 6. There we go. So hopefully, if again you're open to around 2, we can focus more on the cross and I guess chapter 6 of your book. But I'm hoping that those who know there are some people in the audience will do some reading on the book, and then we can do the video on that one. Just because it just helps me to know that they've either downloaded or bought the book before we even talk about the video. So that would be cool. But yeah, sweet. So I guess on that note, then, thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Dr. Agnew, thank you so much again for, even coming to this space and just, you know what I mean, I appreciate your time, appreciate your work. And this was fantastic, man. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. And on that note, 30 seconds and we're out. Peace.